Podcast, a special edition of the Saturday Shenanigans. I have my good friend Kevin here, who is, it's the morning for him and it's the evening for me. How you doing, Kevin?
I am very well. Thank you for organizing today's shenanigans. It was a good timing because I was sort of like hungover today and feeling chatty. So I was like, yeah, let's have a chat, screw around.
The best times to have a good chat, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Um, we
yeah,
were just talking, and I thought it would be fun to start off by asking you the reverse, uh, asking the host about your projects. I mean, we touched on it in a couple other podcasts, but I realized in talking just before that I don't know too much about what you're working on.
yeah.
You did talk about the Terra Libra project, and I think somehow are you a developer by trade? Are you doing like blockchain development?
I've been a lot of things by trade. I've done some blockchain development. I was involved early on the Bitcoin process. Uh, Part of the Bitcoin development thing. I don't contribute to that any longer. People who but much better pedigree for that do that these days. But yeah, mostly the Terra Libre project is, kind of my lifelong passion project. It's kind of the merging of sustainability and technology, using those kind of fundamentals to solve societal level problems. Uh, my It was kind of all kicked off by my book, which is No Absolutes: A Framework for Life, back over there. Um,
Right.
and that was kind of actually instituted by just my travels, my research. And it started out, I was a scientific guy, a very technical guy back in the day, and I ended up coming up with this philosophy of physics, kind of. Well, no, I'm sorry, not a philosophy, kind of an idea of physics, a theory of information. And from that, the philosophy of no absolutes was kind of just born. It
Mhm.
was, it was not something I intended to do. It was just one of those things that after years and years and years of just kind of pounding the pavement, I ended up and I was like, this is what makes sense to me. Let me go ahead and take this out into the world and test this idea, because I tested it against all of my reasoning, all of my research, and I was like, it kind of makes sense. So let's see what other people think. And that's kind of, the very large 10,000 foot perspective of kind of how I came about doing all of this.
So what in the concrete are you working on with the Terra Libra project? Are you trying to tokenize like environmental supply chains? Is that included, or
Well,
what's your?
that's the thing. It's been such a grand project, because when I first came up with the idea, it was just, it was kind of like, it was almost like a Burning Man type idea. It was, uh, people coming together with like-minded ideas, having a similar philosophy. Sustainability is being kind of a foundational aspect to that. And then all of a sudden I realized, well, if you want to redesign society, you have to understand society. You have to understand the economics. You have to understand the supply chains. You have to understand, um, you know, why capitalism works when it does, why it fails when it does, all of these different nuances to the thing. And then it became just kind of a passion project of it's been the past actually 15 years of my life.
Mhm. I'm wondering if you would be interested in some of the projects going on in Bali. It does. I don't. It's not the same as what you're doing, but it might tie in to some level because I just listened to a talk from a guy here, and I'm sort of a member of his Telegram crypto group. And what they're doing here, there are a couple projects, but one of the things they're doing is they're tokenizing farm productivity. So they have, I guess, what happens here in Bali when they have a bad harvest, they need to borrow money from these loan sharks,
Right.
and then they get screwed on the following harvest when they collect the debt. And then I guess there's also several middlemen that will buy up the produce and the inputs and then ship them somewhere. And then there's another middleman that'll buy from them and ship it somewhere else. So it's this really wasteful process, and the farmer ends up getting screwed, and then end up costing way more than it should. So
Right.
this one project is he's actually, yeah, you can actually buy an NFT of the farm productivity,
Right.
loan it directly, and then you get, I think, 40% of the farm profits, which is kind of a cool model.
Yeah, these are interesting models, and I think, ever since I came up with this a long time ago, before actually blockchain was really a thing, and then as blockchain kind of developed, I was like, oh, this is kind of the foundational tool that you can use to reimagine these different types of supply chains, communities, and society at large, actually. Uh, I think where a lot of these things are going to fall short is you're just replacing one middleman with another, right? It's just
Mm.
it's a solution for somebody else to get a piece of the pie. And my whole kind of philosophy behind this is you want to remove as many of those middlemen. You want to remove as many of those roadblocks. You want to exalt the individual, the farmer. You don't want the farmer to have to be selling off shares of his crop, right? You want the farmer to be enabled to, withstand those bad months or those bad years, and, to continue to be the farmer without, being negatively impacted. The
Mm.
promise of of a lot of these tokenizations of things is that you're going to, this is going to be the solution for that. But I think in the reality, you're still, the foundational principles of that is still, hey, you're doing something, I want a piece of that. And I don't,
Mm.
and I think that that is the kind of the distinction where we need to have a change in society. Uh, we don't need those middlemen to do those things, right? And the whole idea behind the blockchain and the tokenization is if it's done correctly, you don't have to.
Yeah, and that speaks to just how upside down the value chain is in the world,
Indeed.
because the people that produce the most important things are always the people that earn the least money.
Right.
And if you think, just think it's just completely inverted. The people at the top, the people selling derivatives trade or whatever in the banks, I mean, they're not
Yeah.
really adding anything of value.
Yeah, no value whatsoever. And they're actually extracting value, and they're not only are they extracting value, but they're actually narrowing the creativity, the imaginative process, the ability for people to grow and to change their fundamentals to, adjust and grow with society. Uh, and
Yeah.
the idea is we're going to make money off of you. And I don't think that that's
Mhm.
the proper mechanism or tool for this. I think blockchain enables the ability for, you know, and this is kind of like the grandma principle. Have you heard of that? Like, as soon as it's
The
this,
what principle?
like the grandma principle, as soon as it's is
No.
so simple that grandma can do it, like that's when it
Mhm.
becomes, it gets mass adoption type idea. And so there's a whole bunch of, I don't want to be too harsh, but they're charlatans and grifters at the end of the day, who are trying to take advantage of that process, and because it's this new thing, and so yeah, you might give grandma an extra 5%, but you're not doing any of the effort, you're not doing any of the work, you're just facilitating some type of transaction. And the idea is, oh, I have a network and I can plug you into that network, and you're going to make more money than you would, going to these loan sharks and these banks and things like that. But at the end of the day, you're still not getting the actual value of what you're putting into the system.
Mhm.
And I think that there's there's a lot of room for growth, and there's a lot of people who are trying to do similar things, right? Like, I mean, you have like El Salvador, for instance. They adopted Bitcoin, and they've had this massive explosion of, trade and tourism, and their crime rates have dropped and all of these things. But still, you have a lot of people who are just trying to take uh, the work and the value off the shoulders of people and make a buck off of it.
Yeah.
And
I'm curious to
that's
see what happens when people just stop working, because like what young people want to farm anymore, right? And that's a problem here. Like the farmers are between 40 and 60, that no one in their 20s is getting into farming hardly.
right. And I think we're reaching that dichotomy in a lot of different industries in the world. Because a lot of people are like, why should I do this? Why should I spend my blood, sweat, and tears to make you $1.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? No, it doesn't. Now, is there any other way to do it? Oftentimes, no. There's not another way to do it. And that's kind of the world we live in. And I think there's a better process for that. And I think by exalting the individual and enabling the individual, removing all of those roadblocks, removing the middleman, because we can, with
Yeah.
blockchain technology as kind of like the fundamental aspect of this, all of a sudden, you really, those people who put in this sweat labor, they get rewarded for it. Imagine that,
Hmm.
right? And that's where things should be in my perspective.
Yeah, it's real interesting. We can go down some real rabbit holes with whole what is money, what is value, because you hear that
Absolutely.
often people say your your pay is based on how much value you contribute, and that's what like millionaires and billionaires will say to justify what they earn. But actually, we just talk about all these examples where a lot of the money isn't actual value; it's just kind of piggybacking off of other people's value, and maybe they just have some ability to get to more people, but they're not actually making the stuff.
Right. And that's the venture capital market of the world, right? I have some experience in the VC industry. I've brought up a couple of businesses. I've sold a couple of businesses. I've failed in quite a few businesses. And watching that from the inside and the outside, looking at it going, I mean, who are you? Just because you have $1 million and you can give me $1 million. Yeah, that gives me some ability to put my idea out into the world. But now you want 30% of everything I do in perpetuity for that.
Mm,
That's not fair. And
nope.
and the people who have money are going to be really pissed off at a statement like that, right? Well, the fairness is because I did the work to build up the network, to do all of these things, to enable you to have this opportunity. And that's kind of the
Yeah.
sell. And it's like, no, no, no. You're just grifting off of other people's good ideas, other people's hard work to make yourself more money. And those people don't add any value oftentimes to a company. They're like, well, I gave you the money. Where's my results? Where's your revenue? Where's your profits?
Yep.
And it's a travesty at the end of the day. I've and not only is it a travesty, but it also limits the overall productivity, the creativity, the innovation of humanity in general. Because if I can't get the $1 million, or I can't get the access to the hundreds of thousands of people that even though I have a great idea, I'm shut down. And
Yeah, because
this
of all the gatekeepers, all the
exactly.
barriers to entry there.
Exactly. And then at the same time, this is kind of the same thing that happens in politics. It's the same thing that happens in all of the upper echelons of society. You have these people, just because of their good fortune to be born into something, typically. Most of these people aren't self-made people. I mean, you look at all of these, oh, you're going to raise up by your bootstraps, and oh, look at these Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, they did it right. Oh no, they had millionaire and billionaire parents who funded all of their endeavors. Nobody really
Yeah, I think
raises
most people don't even
themselves.
know that.
Well, most people
Most people
don't.
don't even know that. They don't tell that. They don't
Yeah.
tell that story.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, because it limits their ability to sell themselves as, some heroic figure, some white knight of society, when in actuality, there's a lot more people qualified than an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos. And there's a lot
Yeah.
greater ideas out there than what those people have. But simple circumstance enables them to be these grand arbiters of society all of a sudden.
I think even Bill Gates was a lot more connected
Oh, yeah.
looking in hindsight than I thought at the time. They portrayed him as just some genius whiz kid, but yeah, he had
Oh,
all these
yeah. His
connections.
story was, oh, he's just a Harvard dropout, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
but it wasn't about where the money came in to fund that. It wasn't about all of the story that got him to the point of Microsoft, because it wasn't Bill Gates. And then even if you look at like his co-founders, If you look at the stories of his co-founders, same thing with like a Steve Jobs, the co-founders of Apple, the co-founders of Microsoft. These people were, not only were they connected, but they were also, very much integral to all of this growth and success, quote unquote, success of these companies. Um, yeah, it's a really wild thing. We have this kind of misconception that, if you just have a great idea, if you just work very hard, if you just do all of these things that, we're told that you're going to make it. When in reality, that's not really the situation. I've met a lot of really interesting and intelligent and creative people who had far more comprehensive, societal changing ideas than any of these people. But if you don't have the connections, if you don't have the ability to voice that, then no one's going to hear it, because the gatekeepers, the money, and just like politics, if you want to run for president, what it costs you some $10 million. How many people have that?
Way more now, I think.
Probably way more. Yeah.
I think Hillary raised like $500 million
Right.
in her
Right.
2016 one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
So
even closer to $1 billion.
yeah. So I mean, it's like, what are we really talking about? And the people who are the same gatekeepers control the media aspects of it, and so they basically control the narrative of, hey, this is how you do it, and that's not a reality. Those narratives typically don't really mirror reality at all.
Yeah.
We live in a society where the best ideas often go to die, or they get usurped and taken advantage of.
Yeah, I mean there are exceptions, but it does seem that these people that we look up to as the billionaires, the successful people, they seem to be more anointed than
Right.
actually climbing up out of, like, this guy Sam Bankman-Fried is a perfect example. He
Indeed.
sort of just came out
No,
of nowhere,
no, I'm
and they're like,
glad you
"Here's
brought
the
this up.
guy." Yeah, yeah, I'm sure you have plenty of opinions, so that'll be a good segue into this one. Because
Yeah.
I've been only following it peripherally. I knew who the guy was before. I knew what he was doing, but I didn't know all of the other stuff that's come out recently about how he got into power and where the money came to and
And
went
where it went.
and where it went. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I watched this all happen from, I was involved in the crypto scene long before that guy ever showed up. And all of a sudden, this sloppy guy with, really interesting ideas, I'll call him interesting to be democratic about it, uh, it shows up into the space and is raising millions and millions and then billions of dollars. And it's like, how does this happen? Well, it happens because there was a lot of very interested people who saw that there was an opportunity for them to make more money at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And he got propped up into a position, and I don't know the guy's character. I've never met him in person, so I won't really pontificate about that. But all of a sudden, he ends up in a position of untold influence and power. And then where does that money stream? It streams back to all sorts of different institutions, different politicians, different people like that. He was the second greatest funder of the Democratic Party in the last election, right? And then, you have things like the New York Times, even after he just pilfered away billions of dollars of customer funds, writes a puff piece and is bringing them on some live chat with Bill Gates and other people next week. Like, how can this guy should be in prison,
Yeah.
but all of a sudden, he's still, he just got in over his head. Oh, poor guy.
Yeah, it's like the biggest fraud ever, really, in the
Double of
public record.
Enron, right? Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, Enron was what, 10, $12 billion, something like that. And this is like 20 some $billion.
Man.
It's a wild thing, man. And, bringing it back to where we started, these are the types of institutions and infrastructures in society that are they're just milking away the creativity, ingenuity, and the good faith of people, and putting it into, just greater coffers for those who have. I mean,
Yeah.
COVID, for instance, was the single greatest transfer of wealth that we've seen in recorded history, right?
Yeah, and then a lot of the political leaders of the world mysteriously became crazy wealthy. I think I read Justin Trudeau of Canada's net worth magically went from 10 million to like 300 million
Yeah,
on a salary of
magically.
300,000. Yeah,
Yeah,
magically.
magically.
Yeah, I think the New Zealand prime premier, something similar, like just suddenly came into tens of millions of dollars. And
Yeah.
it's like, I mean, we all know really what's going on, but
Well,
let's
and
not
that's
talk
the
about it.
thing, like we know what's going on, but it's and this is one of those things. It's like how does this make sense cognitively? It's like we can see what's going on, but how can everybody else not see what's going on?
Yeah.
That was a question I struggled with for quite a while. And then, I started to look more into it. I was like, why might that be the case? Um, and then, you know, there's things like the average education in the United States for 50% of the population is sixth grade. There's 18% of the population who are illiterate. This is the
Hmm.
United States, right? Well,
Yeah.
if 50% of the population only have a sixth grade education, how can they understand these aspects of society? The economics, the supply chains, who owns what company, all of these different dichotomies of what we call modern society. And the reality is they can't. Those people are subjected to the propaganda and the narratives that are fed to them via whatever channels that they were, indoctrinated into. And this is the state of the world that we live in today.
Yeah, so there are those people that they probably don't have the training or the learning to grasp some of the issues. But what's even more interesting are the people that are the educated class. They did go to the right universities. They are in those positions of influence and moderate amounts of wealth and power, I guess, that are like the most offensive of the structures that they came up in. And it was like what I was ranting about last night, where the I was saying that the most useful idiots, and the term useful idiots being somebody who's blissfully asleep and unaware of what's going on and defends it without realizing it, are often these, like where I used to work, like in the big four type law firms or the big consulting companies.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it is either they were indoctrinated by the university and never question it and the whole culture that they're in. And then they're amongst the same people that believe the same way. But
Mm-hmm.
the other point that I was making is that these people just don't have time. I mean, the average person I worked with, like at the firm, they work like 50, 60 hours a week. And I met my old boss for lunch a few months ago during the whole COVID thing and with the vaccine debate and everything. And he like just didn't even know what was going on because he was so absorbed in his career and his work.
Sure.
And he's got a family, he's got kids. I mean, his free time, just as one example, is very limited. And if you have limited free time, you
Mm-hmm.
can't actually scratch the surface of anything. I mean, you might read a free newspaper on your commute or watch, BBC or CNN for 15 minutes a day and think you're informed. But
Right.
actually, you're getting the bottom rung. If you think of information being power, the bottom rung is the free, easily accessible information, which is usually lies or at least heavily distorted.
Propagandized, at least. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. And, there's also the aspect of you don't bite the hand that feeds you that comes into
Right.
play with that.
Yep.
Yeah. It's,
And
yeah,
as a belief system too, like
exactly.
it's a destroying an illusion to think about that, and people would rather hang on to their false beliefs than actually admit that it's lies, because then they would feel foolish. Or it's kind of a heartbreaking process. When I went through it, I understand the desire to avoid it.
It's a heartbreaking I mean, like I said, I've gone through the VC thing. I've done that business thing. And I, when I was really deep involved in it, I realized I was like, oh, I'm in the belly of the beast, man. Like this is, and I watched it, and it's really interesting too because there's so many aspects to this. There's so many angles to it, and we've had kind of like a very vast movement away from religion and spirituality, but that void that created was filled by corporatocracy. And so I've been in part of some of these things where people are, they're raising their hands like it's in some evangelical thing, and they're talking about all this stuff, and you know oh, I'm so thankful for this, and blah 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 blah. And idolatry is, by the definition of the word, but so engrossed in it, so just a part of that system, that to extricate oneself from that is just almost an improbable path.
Yeah. And I was talking about this, I think, on one of our group discussions about how like it's almost like the more you contribute to the lies, the more you're rewarded.
Yeah, well, you
And then
fail
once you
up
start,
too.
yeah, you fail up. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're more incompetent, you are get promoted in some cases.
right. And so what sort of, from a psychological perspective, what sort of behavior does that breed? Right? I mean, if you think about it from a 10,000 foot perspective, if you're looking down at all of this and going, if I just fail up, as long as I toe the popular line here, what sort of, why would I want to change? What's my motivation to have any sort of different opinion to this? Why would I even
Yeah.
want to seek some sort of different opinion? Because clearly this works for me.
Hmm. And that's that silent majority thing. That's how these people end up being the useful idiots, because they're doing fine and they keep quiet. And then we slowly have encroachment on our freedoms and our rights, and I don't
Right?
know. And
No,
it's really disheartening to think about. So a lot of people probably just would rather not think about it.
well, not only is it disheartening, it's what the hell do you do about it?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, what
yeah, to get that out of you.
what sort of power does an individual who actually realizes that this is the case, even if especially if you're involved in that system, like hey man, I'm getting paid $250,000 a year, and I'm getting stock options that are just going through the roof. I know this is hurting people. I know this is taking advantage of people, but guess what? My family's fed. I got a roof over my head, and my kids are set up.
Hmm.
Where's my motivation to actually challenge the system, to challenge the status quo? There's really not much.
No.
Especially if you then contrast it with the indoctrination of education. you know uh, it becomes just this perpetual, like, self-fulfilling loop of idiocy, I guess. But
Yeah. Yeah. Good times. Yeah.
so that's a way to start a podcast.
Yeah. Anyone who didn't wake up yet, maybe you just got jolted awake for that 30 minutes.
Well, and I mean, this is kind of why I do what I do. Is I wrote the book for a reason. Because I hope it gives people a perspective, and I've gotten a lot of feedback that suggests as much. Uh, you know, to challenge that view at a personal level, and I think that's the only thing that we can hope to do from just random individuals having a conversation online. Is to enlighten the individual. Uh,
Hmm.
there's, and it becomes, and the reality of that situation is, it becomes a choice, right? It's a choice to, am I going to support this, or am I not going to support this? And in that choice, there's degrees of what you do. There's people who are like, oh, everybody has to be radically non-compliant. Well, guess what? Not everybody wants to go to jail and damn their family to suffering and having to rebuild and all of these things. Psychologically, uh, it's a very uphill battle.
Yeah. And so I read an interesting quote that touches on this. When an individual reaches the point, like we're talking about, where they see the all, for lack of a better word, bullshit running whatever system they happen to be a part of, and then realize that they can no longer contribute to that because it goes against their values or integrity or idea of the truth.
Mhm.
Um, you basically, what was the quote? It was like, You will fail in 99% of the things that people deem successful, but
Mhm.
succeed in the 1% of things that really matter.
Indeed.
So I think there was a guy, that guy Cole Butler. He had a quote where he was trying to go against what he was told because it validated his principles. And I did the same thing in my job where I started doing what I actually believed in.
Hmm.
And that was like a fast track to being like basically kicked off the corporate ladder
Yep.
because
Yeah.
I couldn't aid the illusion anymore. But I felt internally so much better about things. So
Yeah.
that's that 1%. It's like that piece inside.
Well, and that, there's a lot of value in that for, I did a similar thing. You cut off your nose to spite your face, almost.
Yeah.
Uh, it's a fascinating thing because all of a sudden, if you wake up one day and you're like, wow, I want to be an honorable person. I want to have integrity. I have some ethics. I don't want to support this system. The reality of that is that you just can't do that, right? Like, um, and if you do, the consequences are not just on your shoulders, but they're on everybody who is associated with it. And
Yeah.
this is something that authoritarian regimes really harp on, right? Like, yeah, you can screw us, but guess what? We're going to go after your family, and we're going after your sister, we're going after your mother, we're going after your sister's kids, we're going after all these people, and they're going to lose because of what you did.
Mm.
Is that worth it to you? And that's actually kind of much more of a reality than it's not. Even if it's not a realized thing at the beginning of that journey, right? All of a sudden you have this awakening and you're like, I'm not going to participate in that. And then you start to think about it, and then you start to weigh your actions in that light, and you go, oh my goodness. Well, if I start talking out about this, if I start doing these things, the people who I'm associated with are going to be negatively impacted. I don't really want to hurt
Yeah.
them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it plays on the heartstrings of the individuals and in those familial connections and those friendships and all of those associations. And that is, I mean, that's the reality of the world that we live in today.
Yeah, it ends up being a really lonely path because if you do make that choice, like you said, you're gonna piss off almost everyone.
Right.
That depends on you. Yeah. And then what do you got left? Great. You got your integrity, but you're by yourself. It's kind of a hard road to go down.
It's a very hard road to go down. And I would argue that 99% of people wouldn't go down that road.
No. And you couldn't really blame them for not doing it.
And you can't, yeah, exactly. You can't blame them for not doing it because, damn, man, who wants to hurt everybody that they're associated with?
Yeah, I mean, your life is short anyway. It's like we're gonna die eventually. You may as well get what you want out of it, you know?
Yeah, and then and then it often turns to a selfish thing first,
Yeah.
in my experience. At least it did for me. It was like, well, fuck, I can't fix the world, so I might as well have a great time while I'm sitting here watching
Yeah.
it burn.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I
Pretty
did that.
rational choice.
Right, and I did that for quite a few years personally. And then, I was sitting there, and it was actually, I was down in Costa Rica. I had the opportunity to just not, right? To just quit and to just live on that hill and to not participate and watch the whole thing burn. But then, there was that little annoying voice that was like, you know what? You have some knowledge here, buddy. And to not share it, you're not going to like it. So are you going to take the, the opportunity with all of the very apparent pitfalls? And are you going to walk down that road? And are you willing to accept the consequences of that choice? And it took me a while, but eventually, I was like, yeah, I'm willing to accept those consequences. I'm willing to start having these conversations. I'm willing to put out a book. I'm willing to do these things. Because at the end of the day, if nobody else does, you start to think about all of what that means. And it's like, yeah, I love everybody. And if, if I choose this path, these people will suffer. If I choose this other path, they're probably going to suffer anyway. But there is that 1% of hope, right?
Yep.
And you know,
The
it's a hard
I was watching
choice.
a video on, I think it was Rosicrucianism, where you're probably familiar with this, but
Mhm.
they categorize it in two ways. There's the Christic ascension and the Luciferian
Right.
ascension. And that's exactly what we just described. Luciferian is turn your back on the world, and the Christic is to help by being in the world.
Right. And you know, ultimately that's the choice that everybody has to make. Is like, are you willing to stand up, essentially?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
an interesting thing. Is, but you know, you brought up Rosicrucianism. You know, we've talked about the devoid of religion, but you know, it's really much more of a spirituality type thing, right? Like there's something inherent in humanity. Um, you know, one of those things is to explore. One of those things is that we're very in touch with what we don't see and understand, but we're aware of it. Uh, and to turn one's back on that is, the words are going to fail me right now, but you know, I think that's one of the paramount precipices that each individual must make a choice at some point in their life.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, this we're talking about a spiritual path, in a sense, and that is kind of one of the key crossroads that you reach.
Right.
Um, I would just like where is your community? Where are you based exactly?
I'm in Colorado. The whole Terra Libre project is a worldwide community of people who've attached to the idea. Um, and to be frank, it's not a big thing. You know, there's a little plot of land somewhere in New Mexico. There's, you know, a couple people who are in Thailand. There's, you know, some people in Europe. There's some people in South America. There's some people in Africa. Um, but these are people who've kind of just realized the world for what it is and have a desire to see some form of change.
Mm. And what are they doing with the lands? Are they just developing, growing things?
Yeah, most of it's just kind of working on self-sustainability at this point. Um,
Hmm.
and in that, like, part of my process has been research and development because I'm a technical guy. So I've been building automated systems, automated, you know, vertical growing. You know, I designed how to convert a shipping container into basically a vessel that will generate food for a community of about 120 people. Will also generate base power that will allow communications, all of these things. And the idea is, you know, kind of taking from the cryptocurrency model is, you know, you decentralize, you know, a power grid, you decentralize the agriculture, you decentralize basically everything that you can. And so you can make these communities modular. And I think that's where the real magic starts to happen because if you can make a self-sustaining community, that's a replicatable, duplicatable process for, you know, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. Now that creates the opportunity for real change.
Yeah. And then, so how do they reach out to you if like they want to get involved? It's just on your website, and they have a skill that they can share. That just
Just on the website, and it's not even people who have a skill to share necessarily. It's just people who are like-minded at the end of the day, because skills can
yeah.
be developed, right? You know,
Hmm.
I've built a lot of things. I can teach people how to build those things in a fraction of the time that it took me to learn how to do so. And that's where, you know, it comes down to individual choice.
Yeah. And you said where in Thailand is the one community? I'm curious.
Um, it's fucked. It's where everybody goes to train for like MMA and Muay Thai and
Oh,
all
is
of
it
those.
in the north then, like Chiang Mai or something up there?
Pooped, fucked. Phuck. Yeah, I don't know that.
Oh, Phuket. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Phuket.
yeah.
Sorry, there you go. All right, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm ignorant
yeah. It's not too
sometimes.
far
What
from
can
me.
I
That's why
say?
I'm thinking if I ever go to Thailand, I want to check out what they're
Yeah,
doing.
and so you know, there is a lot of people out there who are searching for answers, is what I've come to find. And
Hmm.
so kind of the motivation to be out here and start talking was to, align those people, give them opportunities, give them tools, uh, uh, resources. And those resources are meager compared to the resources of the system at large. But I don't think this changes from the top down. The only
Yeah.
way this changes is from the bottom up, and it becomes,
Yeah.
intentional communities. It becomes parallel systems of economy, uh, and that's how we really impact real change into the world. And yeah, part of that reality is you're not going to save everybody. It's not going to fix it for everybody. It's going to be a long, arduous road. And the reality of the situation is that most people are not going to benefit from it. Uh, but if you lay the foundations, that's where things grow.
I think it sounds really awesome. It's really
Yeah,
cool.
thanks, brother.
I'm glad that you exist and that there are people working on this stuff.
Yeah, and I'll say it again, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I'm don't want to be a savior, don't want to be anything, don't want to be a guru, don't want to be, any of that things. Um, I don't want to be even the whole idea I designed this around is that even if I built it up, I'm not going to profit from it because that's the
Mm.
design of the thing. There should be no central structure of profit from this. There should be no grand overseer. There should be, it should be a communal effort. It should be a conversation. Um, I posted something today. My my I'll rephrase it. My freedom of choice ends where that starts to negatively impact somebody else, and that's where the conversation needs to begin, right? And,
Yeah.
and and those are the conversations that need to be had in the world. This is why I'm doing the podcast. This is have these conversations to, enlighten these ideas onto people who, yeah, they might be in that what we were talking about before. Those people who are entirely indoctrinated into things and they can't see any way out of the pit that they're in, but yet there is. And all it really takes is just, and you don't have to cut off your nose to spite your face like I have done. It's incremental changes. It's attaching to better ideals. It's putting ethics back into things. It's having some sort of moral compass when we have these conversations. And those are just things that are by and large devoid in the world today.
And part of the challenge today, in particular, is to take that quote you said that the definition of you lose freedom once you negatively impact, or was it something like that? Once you
Mhm.
negatively impact someone else's freedom.
Right.
And the difficulty that I'm seeing now is people are defining negative impact as hurting my feelings.
Right.
And they
And
have
that's not,
all sorts of ways where their feelings can be hurt.
yeah.
And then it just
And that's
becomes like
and
you
that's
can't
not
fight.
what it is. Right.
Yeah.
And this goes, I say oftentimes words are important. Uh, yeah, freedom is a very important word. Freedom doesn't give you, it's not about your feelings, right? Freedom is about choice. And those choices, yeah, you're going to have feelings associated with choice. But just because you feel badly about something doesn't mean that it's impacting your freedom of choice for something else. You know,
Mm.
uh, you can, and there's people who would highly disagree with that, right? Especially when you're talking about, the movements of kind of like the trans movement, for instance. So my freedom of choice to not include you in, the conversation because you're trans now creates this illusion that, your feelings are hurt and you're being impacted as an individual. Whereas the reality of the situation is I didn't make the choice to not include you in that conversation. you know, it's the reality of the conversation doesn't necessarily include the idea that you get to impart your expression in the world onto somebody else. And we talked about this on the last Sunday roundtable. George brought it up, and it was, all these people are looking for more freedom of expression. But when that freedom of expression disallows my freedom of choice, now we have a problem. Now there needs to be a conversation. And that's what we need to have. We need to have those conversations. You don't just get to have it because you feel offended. And nor do I get to have it because I think that's the way we should go. There has to be a conversation, but we're not having those conversations, right?
Yeah, and I'm often struck by how it seems, at least in the last decade or two, we've got so much access to the, the empowerment movement, all of these teachings on how to develop yourself and be a better you and such and such. But for a lot of people, it seems like it's almost had the opposite effect. So when I hear people say that they're triggered by whatever, and they want a safe bubble space, they're anticipating a world where they're never triggered, I think. I guess that's their goal.
I think
And they're
that's
not
the goal.
seeing that being triggered is actually, yeah, but I mean, that it seems like it's their goal, which is the opposite of what you want if you're trying to develop yourself and become a better person. Because to the extent that you can still be triggered, that shows you how much self work you still have to do because you haven't reached that space where you're no longer affected by what other people say and do, as long as it's not physically hurting you.
Well said, brother. I'm going to ring him, Paul.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take a quick break, a pee break.
Oh, okay. How you doing, Paul?
Yeah, I'm doing good, Ben. How are you?
Another day in paradise, brother.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I'm just sitting here listening to you guys chat.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we should, trigger everybody.
Right. Because then we get to have a conversation about it, right?
Well, it's, this is something I've been struggling with too. I'm 50. I try to understand, like, different pronouns and what people want to be recognized with, but at the end of the day, I'm just gonna be me. I'm gonna look at you. If I address you in a way that's not who you see yourself as being, then I didn't mean it. And can we just move on?
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100% with that. And I think it's even, it's even a little bit more than that for me. You know, it's fine if you want to express yourself a certain way, but when you want to force that expression upon me, and I don't get a say in how that interaction occurs, then you just removed all of my freedom, right? You removed all of my authority in for myself in that situation. You removed my agency because now I have to call you a unicorn, or I have to call you a she or a he, even though I don't really care. You're more than welcome to express yourself however you want, but if you're forcing that upon me, you've removed an aspect of freedom from me.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Um, there's a lot of, seems like these days, people out there wanting to make sure that they live their lives without ever being offended, without ever being triggered. And that's just not reality, right?
It's not. Yeah. Well,
And then like them wanting to force, okay, you have to recognize me in this certain way, or you're a terrible person. Now I'm going to put you in a box with everybody else who doesn't recognize what I really am, and that becomes a problem too.
yeah, it becomes a huge problem. I mean, we're watching that problem play out, right? It's it's fine. I don't really care if anybody wants to go off and live their own life and do whatever they want to do, but the second that you start telling me that this is how I have to think, this is how I have to act, that becomes a problem, because now you're not only are you influencing my choice in the world, but you know you- you're my integrity, my ability to have a conversation with people, all of these things that are very paramount to how society functions, all of a sudden go out the window. And it just becomes, who has the louder voice and raises the larger fist, becomes is the authority. It's basically a rekindling of might is right, but in some weird dystopian amalgamation of it.
It's true. And what's happening is there's people out there they're trying to change the way you think, like forcibly.
Right. Well, we
Right.
even,
And,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that becomes a problem, right? And so how do we deal with that? Like most people just, for fear of being labeled, will just go along with it. Even though it has nothing to do with my core belief values, or how I see the world, you're forcing me to see at least this portion of the world through your lens and your lens only.
and I have no say in it.
Yeah, you do have a say in it, but you risk being labeled, right? You're not sensitive, you're racist, you're
A
a bigot.
Nazi, a bigot,
Yeah,
right.
I mean, yeah, you're all of these things just because I think the way that I think, and I'm really not going to allow you to change the way that I think.
Right. And I think, it's fine if you want to have some discourse about it. I think that's the foundation of society, is the discourse, right? The town hall. But if you're not willing to have a discussion about your philosophy, your ideology in the world, and you're just commanding this or else, I think that's a very big problem.
Well, it currently is a very big problem.
Indeed.
It seems like that's been happening.
Yeah.
I was just agreeing with what you guys are saying. It seems like PayPal, by the way.
Hey, what's up, Kev?
But like, as in, people are the discussion is gone for the most part. There's no dialogue in so many realms. It's just this echo chamber yelling, and no one actually interchanges.
Yeah. I mean, it's so much so that, look at just when, what Elon did with Twitter, right? How many people have said the word hate over the past month? How many people who have completely disacknowledged anybody else who, all of these things. And it's not that it just happened a month ago. It's been happening for a long time, of course. But when we have that kind of dichotomy where it's like, oh, you're this person and I'm going to categorize you in this little bubble, and therefore I'm allowed to hate you, I'm allowed to judge you, we remove any sort of reason from society. We're no longer allowed to have a reasonable discussion. It's very fascinating to me that reason has, and kind of in congruence with that, science in evidence has gone by the wayside, and it's all been replaced by feelings and tribalism.
And it's a little bit ironic how technology, to a large degree, has enabled that. Initially we thought with the internet and all these modes of communication, we were going to have better communication. But because of the way the social media algorithms work, people are just filtering out opposing views, so they just get one echo chamber.
And it's not just the way the algorithms work, it's the people who control the algorithms the way they want them to work. I can program an altruistic algorithm. It's not all that hard. But all of a sudden, it doesn't benefit my bottom line. And so because we have these profit-driven industries, and especially once you become beholden to shareholders and all this other shenanigans, now I can't actually have an altruistic mechanism of propagating voice. Now it becomes, we want to pigeonhole people because that's how you get more clicks, right? That's how you get more advertising dollars. So it's an extension of the profit-driven motive of how our society functions. And that's not to say that capitalism is a terrible thing. Capitalism has risen a lot of people out of poverty across the world. But there are extremes to this, and I think we're living in those extremes right now.
Yeah.
So back to the Terra Libre project, which is where we started, Paul, is, I think there's certain aspects of society, there's pillars of society that fundamentally should not be profit driven. Medicine certainly is one of them. Information distribution, news, if you want to call it that, is another one of those. The ability for someone to represent themselves via a vote is another one of those. Once these become profit-driven and motivated enterprises, it's a race to the bottom, and we're approaching the bottom.
Are we?
Maybe. What do you think, Paul?
I don't know. It's kind of scary to think how far the bottom can actually really go.
You're probably right in that.
But I mean, those are all that. I mean, for sure. Like, there are things, and just, I mean, moreover, as people, right? It's like you have a more productive society, I feel, if people are not running around trying, worried about if they're going to get hurt or sick, like this, I broke my leg, it's going to drain my bank account now.
Yeah.
Because I don't have the proper insurance, or I didn't check that box when I was filling out my health insurance that, I tried to save $7 and now it just cost me $107,000,
Yep.
And, and I think energy prices should be, more affordable, and housing, and then people will be productive, right? I think a lot more stuff will get done if people aren't worried about those things, to the extent that everybody's worrying about them now.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, I like the idea of like your Terra Libre project. I've been doing some reading, stuff that you've shared. We should do that on my farm.
Happy to do it, brother. Yeah, this is kind of why I'm out here, is to kind of start having this conversation. And while I've researched and gone down this path for 15 years of my life, I certainly don't have all the answers. But I got to a point where I realized that the conversation needs to happen now, and I can facilitate that conversation. These are things where, imagine a world where all of a sudden every individual wasn't worried about the roof over their head, the cost of electricity, the food that their family needed, because we have the technology to make these things happen. That's the reality. But if we could remove the fear and the pain and the struggle of having to try to acquire these things from a socioeconomic perspective, what does that do to the individual?
It empowers them.
That's my reason.
I think it'll be a mixed bag, right? I think some people will be empowered, others will just be lazy.
Sure, and you're going to get lazy. But here's the thing: eventually, if I sit in a community of 90% of the people who are, they have the same opportunity that I have, and they're doing these really cool things, and they're being exonerated and exemplified by their community and the people around them, your family members. There's a motivation factor there that will inspire a good chunk of people to be better. And yeah, you're still going to have a few, but at the same time, if you have 80% of the people moving and being creative and innovative and building things and creating art and having ideas and making great conversation, that's going to move the needle a lot farther than the next iPhone.
Well, I mean, they say a deaded society is a productive society.
I disagree with that.
And that, well, I mean, to a certain point, you owe money to pay your bills, whatever those bills may be. It's going to motivate you to get up in the morning and go be productive.
Is that motivation, or is that some strong arm,
It's a form of it.
Yeah,
Incentive, at least.
I didn't invent it.
No, I know.
It's the banking thing, right?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely the way the debt-based economy that the whole world, the Western world at least, is based on.
Right. But there's a
Yeah,
point.
I think you're alluding, Paul, to the idea that like people find meaning in struggle.
Yeah.
And if they're not struggling towards something, then what's their purpose?
Right. Thus the trust funder.
Yeah. They end up just like wasting their money doing drugs and partying and, you know,
Yeah.
get bored with their time and finding more and more depraved ways to spend it. There's a
Well,
risk of that.
we saw a little bit of that during COVID, right? Like the government steps in, started handing out money.
Right.
And you're right, Kev. Some people were empowered by that and seized the opportunity. Like I got money coming in from the government, and I'm going to go out there and really and try to double up. And then you saw a whole bunch of people that were like, I'm dropping out. I'm going to take this cash and I'm going to go.
Right. And my kind of pushback towards that would be how much of that was motivated by the structure of society itself. You know, these people were brought up into
Yeah, I
a
was just going to
system.
speak in defense of you, actually.
Yeah, well, these people were brought up into a system where, you know, their opportunity is, you know, oh, $1,200, I can check out for a little bit, as opposed to if you're brought up in a system where, hey, everything's already actually taken care of. There's a solid education system to all these things. Do you actually have the same effect? And I would argue that you don't. And now we don't have evidence
Yeah.
to cite, right? So it becomes one of those, oh, well, that's a cute idea. But at the same time, you know, if you look at just human psychology and, you know, how people act at a societal and communal level, you know, I've been in a lot of small communities in my travels. When you're in, you know, I've met indigenous tribes in the Amazon. You know, these are people who everybody has to really kind of, you know, at least do something in order to maintain the status quo of the community. And usually, like when you don't have these monetary structures imposed upon the community, most of those people I found in my experience were very happy people. Yeah, you had the odd cat who was, you know, who was the town drunk, for instance. But if you look at indigenous, you know, like Native American populations, they called that the Heoka, right? That was the person who would challenge the chief, who would challenge the ideals. Because if I'm just sitting here being a drunk and I'm, you know, saying all these things, you know, these are things that are impacting me, and they're probably impacting the community at a smaller degree, but people feel these things. So they must be acknowledged. There has to be some sort of forum for them. And I think, at least what I saw in my travels was that a lot of the times, you know, there was a massive amount of happiness and joy in those small communities.
Yeah, and I think it's part of it. You touched on just the value system being totally different. You got a value system like we have in the U.S. and a lot of the West. I mean, who are the people that are looked up to? I mean, a lot of them are just kleptocrats. They're everyone getting away with something, trying to get something for nothing. And if that's a predominant value system, yeah, you're going to have people that act that way. But if you got a small community like you described, where it's more honor based and the network is tighter and everyone kind of sees what everyone's doing, perhaps shame is a little bit of a motivation to not be publicly humiliated and seen as a deadbeat, then you'll have different behavior.
Indeed. And also, you know, there were small communities where, you know, somebody would get something stolen from them, and the community would find out who that person was, and that person was no longer a part of the community. Now, the ways that was dealt with, questionable in some of the cases, but the community dealt with those situations, right? You're not allowed to be here. They were expelled.
Right, which is one of the strongest motivators, the threat of being cut off from your community.
Right, and the ancient Greeks did something interesting with this. So back when they were doing the city-state thing, they would actually kick people out, but it wouldn't be an indefinite ban. Like they would kick people out for 10 years. And so after 10 years, all was forgiven. They had the ability to come back into the community and they could regain. There was no, you didn't have a record, you didn't have anything like that. You were a part of the community again, which is,
Cancel culture.
yeah, well, cancel culture, but also, if you think about it from a smaller community in the terms of, honor and, communal practices, if somebody gets expelled for 10 years and they want to come back, they're probably going to be a much more productive member of the community because they made the choice to come back after that expulsion period.
Yeah, too bad our penal system didn't work that way.
Well, when it's driven by profit and slave labor, I don't think it has too much opportunity to do so. And there's other interesting penal systems like like in Scandinavia, they have some sort of crazy rehabilitation rate, like 90 some percent, right? They've had to close down most of their prisons because they, even people who go away for murder get rehabilitated in the community. That's the whole goal of the penal system.
Yeah,
So,
there's some Scandinavian countries where you can kill a whole bunch of kids on an island and the max sentence is 25 years.
right, and there's a conversation we had about that for sure. But at the same time, there is you have to look at the data and say, well, maybe there should be some classifications, like you kill a whole bunch of kids. I wouldn't call myself in favor of the death penalty, right? But there has to be some sort of recompense with that. Reinstituting those people into society becomes then a societal question. Is the community going to accept those people back? If the community has the capacity to accept those people back, then who's to say that shouldn't be the case?
Well, you're talking about like in Scandinavian countries, they don't see the high rates of crime that we have here, in America.
Right, and I think
a lot of it is because of their justice system, where, in most cases, just because you go to prison doesn't mean you can't vote anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They don't imprison people like animals like we do here, right? There's no threat of being molested or murdered in those prisons like there is here.
Mm-hmm.
We actually use, the threats of violence as a motivator, right? It's something we don't talk about.
Absolutely.
But everybody knows, right? Everybody's heard the soap on a rope jokes.
Mm-hmm. Don't drop the soap.
But that stuff's real in American prisons, and even worse. And so it's this idea that, oh, you're going to go to prison. Well, no, not really. You're going to go somewhere where you're going to have to fight for survival.
And you're going to be,
that's the motivator for not committing crimes, not being separated from your family, or losing your freedom, participating in society. That's not the threat. The threat is you're going to get raped, murdered, molested, whatever. That's the motivator. And
100%.
That's not right. Whereas in Scandinavian countries, they don't do that. That doesn't happen. Finland, Sweden, Norway. They don't play that way.
And I think part of the problem is, when you dissect these things and you take one piece of them out and you start to talk about these singular pieces, it misses the scope of things. And, there's, in that scope of things is that, there's also the socioeconomic part of that, right? Some people going to prison is actually a holiday because they couldn't eat on the street. They didn't have a house for years, and all of a sudden they got a roof over their head, they got a bed, they got food. And so there's contributing factors to all of these things. And I think, when we're talking about how to evolve society, how to move this thing into a better direction, you have to take into account all those things. And that gets us back to, the fundamental aspects of society, the pillars of society. How should they be how should they be structured, let alone governed, if they should be governed at all? The underlying structure of them can be created in such a way that the impetus on the individual is driven via the community aspect, via the societal aspect, and not the threat of violence.
Yeah, and I agree.
All
Yeah,
right.
shame
But
keeping people in check.
Say what? What did you say, Kevin? Sorry.
The ability of shame to keep people in check within the community.
Well, yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I mean, we got to treat people with dignity. That's the problem.
indeed. That's the first. That's part of the first
Part
step.
of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people need to be treated with dignity, and that's gone. Like you can watch, police interaction with everyday citizens, that aren't committing crimes, and they don't treat them with dignity. I'm not saying all cops are bad, but it just seems to be like a growing problem where there seems to be this, I'm the authority, and therefore you're just the person, the peon, and so what I say goes. And
Hmm.
and so in many cases, police officers, and I mean not just them, but teachers and people in authority don't treat each other with dignity, and that's a huge problem. Doesn't matter what crimes people commit or what they're doing. um, you should always treat people with dignity.
Right.
Yeah, it's like this dehumanization of the other has just accelerated in pretty much every domain.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and it's divide and conquer at some level. It's bread and circus. It's the haves and the have-nots. It's the socioeconomic divide. Um, it's and again, it's when you start to focus on these things explicitly, it kind of removes itself from the collective whole. And the reality is that society at scale, that Western society at scale, at least, is very broken. And it creates more and more broken people because of that. And then you have all these compounding, factors, right? You have this appeal to authority. You have your cops, for instance. There was that case of quite a few years ago. Some guy in New York City wanted to be a detective. They give an IQ test for being a detective. He scored too high, and so they denied him the ability to be a detective.
Yeah,
And it
he's
was
gotta go join
and it was
FBI.
held up by court.
Yeah, that's a problem.
What?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, that was a real thing. He was too smart to be a part of the police department because
We should go join the FBI then, right? Like I would have,
right,
thought that would be the next logical thing to do.
right, and that's
I
kind of
get your point.
yeah, but
I understand.
yeah, that's
Point.
kind of the argument too, is that there's always like there's these alternatives. Well, that's okay because you can go do this, but is it okay? Is it okay for the people who are supposed to protect and serve society to be at a certain educational level? So, the idea being that they're going to just kind of toe the line as opposed to question why the line exists in the first place?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's
Yeah,
not
at
the
a certain
idea.
level, you see like who these forces are in service to, right?
Right.
Yeah. They're basically the truncheons of the overall establishment. They don't want people that think too much.
Right. And that's kind of, especially when you get into the political atmosphere, that's exactly what happens too. You don't want people who are going to question the party narrative. You want people who are going to string along and support it and raise bravado about it. I mean, you see it on both sides today, whether it's a Trump or a Biden. You got all these sycophants, and it's just it's nauseating to me. But I feel I'm in the minority.
Yeah, you probably are.
I think it's a growing minority. I think there's growing discontent.
I think so. I would agree with you.
Politics have become a blood sport, man.
They certainly have.
Yep.
So you got to pick a side,
Well,
and you got to go to war.
See, but that's the
and you gotta
thing.
hate your
But then you're
family.
playing the game, right? Then you're playing it. Then you already lost.
Yeah, it's the bread and circus, right? It's the divide and conquer of, it's this playbook's been written a long time ago, and it's been repeat over and over through generations, and here we are again doing the same damn thing.
Yeah.
So how do you fix it?
Well, you you start different. You start with a different fundamental concept of community. You change these things, and to be fair, we probably couldn't have changed it before relatively recently. Our ability to have mass communication, our ability to have these parallel systems of economy, our ability to transact with one another at a personal level without an institution being a part of it. These are things that are fairly novel, right? Unless you were just like a small scale thing. If you're just a couple of different communities in some South American country, then yeah, your barter system is I'll trade you 2 chickens for a cow, and we have these relations, and we'll police ourselves and these things. But once you get to a grander scale of society, where people have held the reins and dictated how people should be ruled and why they should be ruled, and the judgment of if they fall foul of that, we really haven't had the opportunity to have these conversations at a, at least a small level, but definitely a larger level.
Well, I think one of the growing concerns is, like here in America, whether it's economics or politics, is people are just jumping off the wheel, right? They're saying this is too much. I'm working way too much. I'm paying for a place I never get to see and family I never get to enjoy, and and I'm done. And people are just, they're getting off the hamster wheel. They're bailing. And then I think I heard a little bit of your guys' conversation earlier about just stopping.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in some ways that's the big reset right there.
And I think that's the first rational choice of somebody who awakes into this, right? Because until you start to do some research, until you start to dig, until you start to look for people who are offering different solutions, all this stuff, that's the first choice. It's like, damn, non-participation. That's all I can do. And some people are just so broken by the reality of waking up that that's probably all they're going to do. Especially someone who's invested 25 years of their life into a system that all of a sudden they wake up one day and they're like, I just can't do it.
Yeah, and that happens every single day.
Mm-hmm.
People are just saying enough.
Yep.
Like this is enough. I can't do it anymore. I mean, I see it here, and I live in a small community, mm-hmm. and I'm watching homelessness just grow, like pretty rapidly.
Interesting.
And like we're here. Well, I mean, I live in a small community, but I also live in a very expensive small community.
Mm.
Right? It's probably Maui County's got to be one of the 1, 2, or 3 most expensive places to live in the United States.
Sure.
And we're also a community that hasn't been investing in affordable housing, right? We're building we love to build housing communities for multi-millionaires and billionaires. Like, we're really good at that. But we're not good at building affordable housing or housing for middle class people. You can go on Zillow. I live in Haiku, Maui. You can go on Zillow, type it in, and there's like 10 houses,
mm-hmm.
in worth of inventory in this community. And so people are just like, I can't afford anything. Inflation, the rising cost of gas mm-hmm. and food. And people are like, I'm done. I'm dropping out. I'm gonna go down to Baldwin Beach and live in my truck.
Yeah.
It's pretty convenient to be homeless here in Hawaii, right? It's like we don't have a winter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
if I
It's
we
were
have,
homeless, I would go.
yeah, we have very strong social programs here. Like Hawaii is one of the best places to get medical insurance if you don't have a job or money at all. And then we're really, we're a really liberal state, and I'm not griping about that, but you see it here. It's, our rate of homelessness is flying through the roof right now. It's crisis.
well, and it's not,
It
it's
was already
everywhere.
high years ago when I visited.
What's that?
But I was there like 20 years ago, and even then I noticed there was a shit ton of homeless people in Honolulu. Even then,
Yeah. Well, it's like I said, it's for people who have, like, they might not function in Portland, Oregon, or in Peoria, Illinois, and somehow they make it here because they don't got to worry about winter, and they don't got
Right.
to worry about health
Food.
care, and they don't got to worry about food stamps, and they
Mm.
don't got to worry about, like assisted housing and stuff like that. Like we're really good at those things over here in Hawaii, but that infrastructure that's in place, we're also a state of like 1.3 or 1.4 million people.
Mhm.
So that infrastructure that we have built is now crashing because it's overloaded with people from all over the place. Like when I drive, around Maui and I see homeless people, you can kind of, listen to them talk and look at them and say, I don't think you're from Hawaii, right?
Mhm.
And in many cases, they're not. They're from somewhere else.
Well, it's always easier to be homeless in a tropical environment than it is anywhere else. Food grows on the
Yeah,
trees year round, right? And to your point, you don't have to worry about the winter. You don't have to worry about cold. You don't have to worry about heating yourself. The beach is always going to be 82 degrees, you know, maybe 77 on a breezy day. Um, and, it's not just there either. This is something that I've noticed rampant, kind of everywhere that there's a larger city center in the United States, and this is really correlated with the rise in property values. So we in Colorado Springs, for instance, we experienced you know uh, the value of this house went up 40% over COVID. Uh,
good for you.
yeah, right. But not great for everybody else. And so the reality of that situation is who actually raised that property value. And if you look at who actually bought up all those houses, it was Zillow, it was BlackRock, it was Citadel, it was
oh,
all of these multinational conglomerates with massive, massive resources and funds and able to put, trillions of dollars of debt on the books. And raising the property values of all these places, and then they're turning around and they're renting them for $2,500 a month, $2,000 a month, and so there's something systemic about it. Um, I have a hypothesis. There's the World Economic Forum. They release their thing. You're going to own nothing and like
I was
it,
just gonna
right?
say that. But
And so how do you get people to own nothing and like it? Well, one of the first pillars of that is they have to not be able to afford to own anything. And then the next iteration of that is you have to provide them with some sort of foundation. Now you have all these countries rolling out these central bank digital currencies. Going back to the beginning of our conversation, Kev, and these central bank digital currencies are going to be rolled out in such a manner that, hey, we're going to give you a stipend of $3,000 a month plus this rent assisted housing and all of these things, and you're going to cover your food. Part of the stipulation of that is you're not going to be able to own property in perpetuity. So no matter if you were to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, which I think we would all agree that that's probably a very small, slim percentage of the population to begin with, even if you were to do that, then you're not going to be able to own property because you already signed away your rights to do so by accepting this stipend.
Whoa.
And I think that's where
wow.
we're going.
Whoa. Well, I mean, I guess it depends on what the stipend is.
Well, that's the whole
People will sell out for a low amount. A lot of people.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Like I said, during COVID, the value of this house went up 40%. What happens when it goes up 200%? How many people are going to sell their house? Eventually, you fast forward that over 10 years, how many people have sold their house? Probably a fair, decent amount of people, because they're like, damn, I got a return on my investment. Now, those people are going to be okay, right? They're going to go buy land somewhere else. They're going to do things like that. But when it comes to city centers, the people who live in city centers, which is the vast majority of the population on this planet, are all of a sudden going to not be able to afford to live unless they accept the stipend.
They should just take to the streets. I mean,
to what end?
It's like all the people that are paying stipends, right, are doing so people can live, because I think, you know, in America right now, in big cities, there's a problem. It's a visual problem, right? Like you look at Los Angeles, come to LA, it's great. You can come to our beaches, our museums, you know, fine dining. You could possibly get a chance to see a scene of a movie being shot somewhere. People like that. Come to Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm and all the rest of those places, right? But the issue is like, if you've driven around Los Angeles lately, like I have, there's homeless people everywhere, and that's not good. So at some point, all of those homeless people are going to start driving down property prices. So what are these? When there's a formula there, right? And when that starts to really tilt in a downward manner, then that's when the stipend thing, hey, we got to get people some money, and we need to get people a place to live so we can get them off the streets, because it's not doing us or our city, the powers that be, any good.
Right. And then so part of the stipulation of that stipend is you're going to give up your ability to own property. And, you know, most people, by and large,
well, they're going to take it. Most people will take that.
Yeah, most people would take it. But so it is interesting. But if you look at all of the people with the greatest amount of money in the world, this is what they're saying is the agenda for what's to come down the line, right? I mean, you just had Klaus Schwab a couple days ago or yesterday talking at the G20 summit, talking about social credit systems and central bank digital currencies and this whole you will own nothing and like it, again, to an ovation of the audience. You know, so if you fact, yeah, you can say, oh yeah, that's just, you know, rich people being rich people, but you have to factor in at some level that those are the people actually at least pulling some of the strings. And I would make an argument that they're pulling a lot more of the strings than many people are aware of. And so let's just dissect it down to the individual who is now living on the street. They don't really give a shit about not owning property anymore. Hey man, you're going to give me $2,000 a month plus place to live, and I don't have to pay for food? Fuck, I'm in.
Yeah, but that won't last, right? Because as soon as you give people food and a hot shower and a warm bed to sleep in, their priorities change.
Yeah, but if they already signed away their rights,
I don't know how you can sign away rights. That's
the thing. If you So if you look at the text of so Canada's already passed theirs. Biden already signed an executive order for a central bank digital currency. If you look at the text of these things, they very much mirror what the World Economic Forum has talked about in these instances. And what's going to happen is you're going to get a government issued cell phone. You're not going to have to pay for that. You're going to get your stipend on your cell phone as long as you have the app. It's going to be tied to a social. Yeah, it's going to be tied to a social credit system, kind of like what they've already rolled out in China. And so when you accept that, you are, basically a terms of service. It's a contract.
Is it repayable?
No.
It's not repayable.
No, it's not.
$1,000 worth of assistance from something or somebody.
No, it's not repayable.
And I got that. So you're saying that they're going to warehouse people.
Exactly. And that's what the text says.
They can't do that.
Well, they can do it with tech. The technology can enable that.
Right.
Because you can restrict what people can use it for.
Right. And so you attach it to some sort of social credit system. And then so even if you were to go off and try to repay it, right? Now all of a sudden it's going to be negated by the fact that you said something negative about the administration, or that you complained about yada yada on social media. For instance, what they're doing in China, right? You're not allowed to go to freaking Starbucks unless you scan your QR code and it pops up green. So, it would
those are COVID restrictions, right?
kind of, not
Yeah, it's
entirely.
gonna bleed over into this and be permanent. It started with COVID.
It started with COVID. Now it's everything. So they have their whole WeChat thing, and that thing is completely monitored by the government. You say something negative about the government in WeChat, you're not allowed to ride the bus. You're not allowed to buy groceries. You're not allowed to get on a plane. You're not allowed to basically interact with the greater parts of society. Yeah, you could probably still barter for a chicken from your local farmer, but your existence in this world is going to be heavily, heavily negated.
I mean, I can see.
I saw a video of actually on the WeChat thing. The police showed up at someone's house, and it was in Chinese, and they're interrogating the person. It's like, you said something online. Why'd you say it? And it was pretty creepy to watch.
Yeah.
That's China, right?
Right, that's China, and it's easy to say that that's China, but how much of a stretch of the imagination is it to say that that wouldn't happen when the government is now issuing the money to the people?
So, I mean, if you're saying like how big a stretch of the imagination is it to think that something like that could happen in America, I think that's a pretty big stretch.
I would think so too, but at the same time, I think that that big stretch only exists on people who are, already own some property, already landowners, already have, businesses, things like that. Those people, they're not going to accept that 100%. But again, we're talking about, look, you just mentioned it, people leaving their jobs, quitting the system, the homelessness rise of that. How do we circumvent that? Well, now if all of a sudden the government is giving out the money, they're making the terms of the contract. They are the arbiters of that. So it's not a huge, look what they tried to do with just the lockdowns, for instance. Now imagine if if you didn't comply with the lockdown and you got caught outside, your stipend from the government is now in question. You're no longer allowed to go to travel on trains, to travel on airplanes, to travel on buses. These are not, they're not so far as I think we would hope they would be.
I mean, it sounds interesting, but it sounds really far to me.
I would agree. It sounds far to me too, and I think one of the reasons it kind of sounds far, at least in the United States, is because there's more guns in this country than there are people. So I think the rubber meets the road at some point. But I think where the rubber meets the road is a very important inflection point, and I think that inflection point is in bigger cities where you're going to have this rampant homelessness. You're going to have mass adoption of this system. And so just like we were talking about communities and public shame and all of that before, you're going to have that same effect from the other side coming in. I don't think it's going to be like a nationwide thing overnight type idea. I think it's going to roll out in greater city centers where there's these problems that exist.
I mean,
And the New York Fed just piloted it, right? They're doing a 12-week pilot.
Yes, they are.
For the same system that you're talking about?
Well, not exactly the same.
Well, not tied yet. Not tied in the way that Ben said, but yeah, digital dollar, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And
yeah, I mean, honestly, it sounds like a pretty extreme solution. I think there's, unless we think that there's some nefarious activities happening amongst the wealthy people that supposedly are controlling all the power in this world, then maybe it's maybe it's not so far, but
I don't think it's without of the or beyond the realms of possibility to assume a malicious nature from the people who control power uh in their mission to retain power and grow power. I think if we were to look at human history, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that seems to be the case. Whenever power centralizes to a certain degree, that power tries to clamp down excessively. Uh,
uh, I mean, I don't disagree with that, but I mean, I think history has shown, like, if you let's just look at the history of the United States.
mhm.
You know, what you're suggesting would be a real like shift from from United States public policy.
Right. And like I said, I don't think this is going to be an overnight thing. It's not going to be a nationwide thing. This is going to be something that's going to be rolled out case by case. Now, retract from the nationwide and just think about like a California and LA situation. Look at the kind of measures that they've taken already in terms of public policy, law, justice, things like that. It's not a great extrapolation to see something like that being enabled. Uh, so this kind of dovetails into what I've talked about before, but I think we're kind of witnessing the erosion of nation states globally. And I think this is part of it.
Hmm. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, but then you can say, like, let's look at Africa, where in in the
Okay.
last 60 years, we've seen a rise of nation states. They've moved from colonization
Right, but
into autonomous nations.
right, but who controls those nation states? For instance, I think the new PM
Well,
of
don't say the news. Don't say the name. Don't say it.
I won't. But the new PM of Italy just came out and did a whole freaking thing about the countries that France, institutes. Hey, we're gonna print your money for you, but you have to put 50% of your exports in our coffers. You know, so and then you look at a lot of the rise of those nation states has been through the you have the Belt and Road Initiative from China, you have investments from the United States, you have old colonialism from Europe. uh, so how much of that is a rise of nations and how much of it is an extension of power from the structures that already exist?
Well, I mean, that's really hard to determine. It's about
I
how those nations use those resources or investments,
Right, but they're
to move
contract.
forward, and what are they getting? What are they giving up for those resources?
Right. So, for instance, the one that was cited was this. I can't remember the name. It started with a B, but their contractual arrangement for their whole entire nation is that 50% of their exports has to go into French coffers.
An African
An
country.
African nation. Yeah, yeah. This just made news today. You can look it up. The Italian, new Italian prime minister, she just was talking about it and had a whole press conference about it. And then she cited that there's 15 other countries in Africa that are on similar arrangements and contracts with France, and they're using the franc, which France doesn't even use the franc anymore, which is a wild thing. Uh, so yeah, there's and we could it would probably behoove us to dig into the nuance of this. But I would guess, just upon my preliminary research, that the vast majority um, probably has some sort of contractual arrangement with the powers that be that are essentially just sucking the resources and life out of these countries. Which, that's kind of been the history of the world. So it's not like it's a novel thing.
No, it's definitely not novel. But I mean, it's got me thinking about. Wow, I'm gonna have to look up that article.
Yeah,
And
I was surprised by it. I saw it. It was actually today. I saw it, and she did a whole interview thing, and she cited all of this stuff. Now, honestly, I haven't delved into it to go, fact check the whole thing. But even if it's, a fraction of truth, uh, that's something to very much consider in the grand scale of, this whole machination of what we're calling society at a global level.
well, I mean, it's a little bit like. So it doesn't sound much different than like the World Bank's, you know, loaning countries money
Now you're getting us canceled.
for, well, but then like, understanding that, they have to implement austerity
Mm-hmm.
in order to, receive the funds, right? So, I mean, it's not, I mean, it doesn't sound so different than that, other than, you replace,
It's
austerity with, a country's potential GDP,
right.
and
I don't.
you replace banks with France. I don't know.
Well, I think it would probably more be a correct articulation to say that it's, the French is kind of a lower level of that international debt-based system, uh, which just about every country on the planet now is participating in.
I'd be curious to see how it all plays out because we're not going to have adoption of this new system uniformly. Like which countries sort of resist and push back, and how people move between these places.
Well,
Well,
I
it's
think.
like
Go ahead.
Chinese started their World Bank. They started loaning to developing nations in Asia and in South America without austerity measures, right? And so that was really appealing
Well,
to.
not exactly austerity, but
Right.
they did some trades.
So I bore witness to this in my travels. I was down in Costa Rica. I think it was 2008 when this started to happen. All of a sudden, the Costa Rican police force got donated a whole bunch of cars, a whole bunch of helicopters. The Chinese came over and built a brand new soccer stadium with slave labor. They built a whole bunch of bridges in the country. And there was, there was no austerity towards it. Fast forward a few years, because all the politicians at the same time were paid off. Chinatown erupts in downtown San Jose, the capital of Costa Rica, and then all of a sudden there's this free trade agreement with China. Part of that free trade agreement was you're giving up all the rights to your fishing in all of your coastal areas to Chinese. So all of a sudden, 4 years later is 2012, 2013. All the local fishermen are complaining because you have these Chinese fishing vessels just coming over and longlining and raping the seas. Every single hardware store, every single grocery store, all of a sudden turned into Chinese operated operations. You went from walking in and seeing locals to walking in and seeing Chinese people watching Chinese television. Didn't even speak Spanish, for that matter. And this was not just in Costa Rica. I saw this up and down the Pacific coast, all the way from Chile to north to Mexico. Mexico didn't have the same degree of it, but definitely Central and South America.
Well, I mean, you guys know who Dr. Umar Johnson is?
No?
He's a black nationalist, Pan-Africanist here in America. But he was talking about similar things. His ties with Jamaica. And, but anyways, it sounds kind of like, so you got the bourgeoisie class of people that are in South America that are making deals with Chinese people to exploit the people of South America.
Right.
So what are these powers that be? What are they giving up? I mean, if there are going to be no austerity measures, right? Or you're saying there are austerity measures? Because I thought that.
No, so what they gave up was the rights to the rights to fishing. So all of a sudden you can have international vessels come in and fish all these waters. It was the rights to business operations. So all was, and so you have to figure as a Chinese, and they would just ship people over, and Chinese nationals would buy up the grocery stores, the hardware stores, and whatnot. And if the ones who didn't buy out, they ended up getting out competed because all of the people who came over were able to get cheaper goods from China because of the free trade agreements that were signed by these countries. The import tax when I was down in Costa Rica was like 30-some%. You couldn't buy a bag of Doritos or Heinz ketchup or anything like that without, paying through the nose. All of a sudden, free trade agreement gets signed with China. All of these cheap shit products get imported. They're cheaper, so people buy them because it's a lower economic status in the countries, and they could get more bang for their buck, so to speak. And they just outcompete the marketplace.
So what happens in these countries when they're unable to repay their loans to China?
Well, it doesn't matter because, and it wasn't even loans. These were donated. So they donated.
It seems like a more decentralized way to do it.
Yeah.
Like it's not so much government going like this. It's sort of, they spread it out amongst enterprise.
Right. So they just came to the government and, more so specific politicians and said, hey, we're going to donate this to you. Do you want it? Like,
So
hey.
It's more like Confessions of a Corporate Hitman.
Kind of. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was essentially, you bought off a few people and they allowed the infiltration of these things because, hey, we're going to get a new soccer stadium. And it's all donated. It's all free to us. And so, a lot of the local people are like, hey, free soccer stadium. We love a new soccer stadium. They import slave labor, build the soccer stadium, they build bridges, they donate helicopters, they donate cars, they donate all this stuff to the infrastructure of the country, and then all of a sudden they come with hey, here's a free trade agreement, and in that free trade agreement it outlines the ability for Chinese fishing vessels to come in and fish the local waters. It outlines the ability for Chinese businessmen to come in and take over, have local businesses, not be subjected to the rules and the laws necessarily of even the local municipalities. It was wild stuff.
I mean, that's what Dr. Umar Johnson was saying in Jamaica, where all these Chinese people in Jamaica now are treated like diplomats, even though they're just like running mom and pop style grocery stores, eateries, hotels.
Right.
Because it's all Chinese money and they kind of play by their own rules.
Yeah, and they do, and they actually set up their own police stations too, and all sorts of. I watched it all unfold in front of me as I was traveling, and the way that it changed the culture in the countries was fascinating. I wouldn't call it a great fascination either.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
So instead of austerity, and you have to give credit where credit's due. It's a hell of a fucking business plan. You go in and you give somebody something, you get them in your pocket, and then you come to them with a small ask, relatively speaking, right? You're not asking for them to establish some sort of grand hierarchy of Chinese blah, 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 blah. You're just asking for a free trade agreement. You're asking for access to some fishing. You're asking for some access to some, instead of the 30% import tax, we just don't want to pay that 30% import tax. Look, we gave you all this free stuff. Aren't we nice people? Do you like our agreement? Hey, we'll sign your agreement. Lo and behold, now all of a sudden the foothold's there. Now you have, and now you're importing products at a 30% discount to your competitor. How are you ever going to lose?
Right. We all watch The Godfather.
Cheers.
Guys, I got to take off. I don't want to interrupt, but please continue.
All right, Kevin.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, Ted.
Thanks, brother.
Have a good day,
All
man.
right.
Yeah.
It's down to me and you now, Ben.
Say what?
It's down to me and you.
Yeah, brother. So we've been fucking doom and gloom for a long time now. Let's change the pace. You mentioned last week you're doing this. What was it? Something about something about light pollution in the skies, right?
Yeah, Hawaii dark sky.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How,
yeah. It's interesting. I'm fortunate to live in the best place in the world to view stars, and so it's important that we preserve our nighttime skies for everybody. I mean, where you live, I'm sure there's some great, star viewing,
used to
out in
be.
the mountains.
Yeah, well, you have to go up
Yeah,
deep into the mountains now. Yeah.
deep in the mountains, right? Yeah. So what we're trying to do is protect Hawaii's night skies, right? And
Awesome.
also, get the state of Hawaii to recognize some critical darkness, um, critical darkness zones within the state of Hawaii, and protect them.
Awesome.
Yeah, so people can go to these places and and look at stars.
Awesome, brother. How's that going?
It's going slow. We've been working on it for a few years. I want to say, man, I mean, this thing started in a music store in Kahului, Maui. I would take my kid to a guitar lesson every week,
Mhm.
and I got to be friends with a guy who works in that music store who's also an amateur astronomer, and but he teaches at the local University of Hawaii Maui campus here. He teaches astronomy, and he gives a lot of star talks, sets up telescopes in various places around Maui, and then we just got to talking about, like, how do we protect our night skies. Well, it's actually, Hawaii is an interesting place in that it's in our state constitution. There are laws that protect Hawaii's night skies because we
Oh,
know how
cool.
valuable, yes, looking at the night sky is,
Hmm.
but they haven't been enforced. A lot of these laws have not been enforced, and it's kind of a hard thing to do, but we are working to kind of, at least here on Maui, start here on Maui, and start to identify some of the the bigger offenders, light polluters, and
Excellent.
address it. Get an attorney involved and start, not like we're going to go sue people, but to write a letter, right, that
Right.
says, hey, you may not be aware, but here in Hawaii, we have laws to protect the night sky that say this, that, and the other, and you're not in compliance. Maybe there's something we can do to work with you to bring you into compliance. Not
Awesome.
really shaming people, or shaming never works, right? So um that's our mission. And then, like I said, to identify these places, um that have already been, that actually already been identified, identify more of them, and then get the state of Hawaii to recognize them as fantastic places to view the night sky and protect them.
Well, that's awesome that you have it as a something that's already written in the Constitution.
Yeah, it is. It's what we can do here is well, and like a lot of discoveries, deep space discoveries occur right here in the Hawaiian Islands. Either on, I live on the side of Haleakala,
Right? Yeah.
and there's a lot of there's observatories up there.
Hmm.
Um, Mauna Kea on the Big
I'm
Island.
familiar with that one. Yeah.
Yeah, which is a little taller and probably a little bit better viewing of the sky than Haleakala, but there are a number of places here where where a lot of things are discovered. And I'm not
Sure.
saying, I mean, there's the Hawaiian cultural side of me that is like, we should really be limiting the amount of telescopes, or at least, retiring ones that aren't being used anymore, and kind of limiting the footprint that telescopes have on top of these mountains. But at the same time, um, we need to be protecting that night sky for everybody. For me in my front yard, or my neighbors that want to go out and enjoy the sky at night.
Hell yeah, brother. As a fisherman, spending quite a bit of time around the equator, uh, there's really nothing like it.
Right.
I mean, and talk about having a perspective on your place in the universe.
Yeah.
You know, when you can see that, and you know, I mean, look, our ancestors definitely had that perspective, right? And that's kind of the foundations for all of theology and religion and all sorts of things, right? Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, and living that experience, and then also living in a place where light pollution has removed that experience over the course of my life. uh, I feel that, man. So best of luck to you. Anything I can do to help out, let me know.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we talk about, hallucinogens on another discussion that you and I are part of,
Hmm.
and we talk about, reconnecting with our inner selves and with our communities and with the planet, and this is an essential part of that.
I 100% agree, brother.
Going out there and being able to be outside. I mean, a long time ago, our ancestors, that was the form, that was their television, that was their
Right.
form of entertainment. Looking at the sky. But now we sit inside with artificial light and roofs on the structures that we live in, um, that make it impossible for us. And then we're distracted by internet and telephones and television and all the rest of those things. When there's a whole beautiful, part of the world to experience, like right out your door. If you're fortunate to live in a place like I live in, right, I can see the Milky Way. I can go outside.
Ah, I miss it,
It just
man.
got dark, but I could see the Milky Way. I was out there with my neighbors just last night, two of my neighbors, and we were standing out there watching the Pleiades come over the eucalyptus trees by
Ah,
our neighborhood, and
you're breaking my heart,
whole
brother.
and the whole Milky Way, right?
Hmm.
And it's just and we were looking at Jupiter and what was behind Jupiter, right next to Jupiter. I can't remember the planet. But anyways, all right, Neptune.
Yeah.
And so, you go outside and you get to see, and like I said, I'm blessed to live where I live, and that I've been able to, share these experiences with my kids and go out and like really spend some time and say, look up there and tell me what you see. And the response, over the years from my kids have been really, really interesting.
Sure, man. Like, talk about a whole thing removed from the vast majority of society.
Yeah.
What
I
a
mean,
perspective, right?
yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then I go to, I go to Southern California, like usually once a year
Hmm.
and to visit family, like San Diego.
Hmm.
And you go outside there and it's like, wow,
Can't
there's,
can't see
I can see,
shit.
yeah, I can see five stars. They're not even stars. I can only see the planets, right?
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
and if I'm lucky, like Orion's belt during the winter, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But those things are vital. Like those are our, looking at the stars is when you go out and you really start connecting with the night sky, like that's a grounding like no other.
The perspective that you just, I mean, if you don't have it, you don't have it. And
Yeah.
it's such a valuable perspective. I mean, I remember growing up, I could see the Milky Way in Colorado. Uh, Not necessarily Colorado Springs, but just up in the foothills, up into the lower Rockies, you could see the Milky Way. Now, exactly, you're hard pressed to see planets sometimes. I mean, you get glimpses of constellations, but it's mostly drowned out. You have to go deep into the mountains in order to see the Milky Way. Uh, and it's a fascinating thing that that's kind of what we grew from, and now all of a sudden we're so detached from it in mass, right?
Yeah. I mean, think about it, when you talk about like farming, like here in Hawaii with in Hawaiian culture, like
Hmm.
farming, and whether it was war, with the neighboring islands, or any like religious practices, those things were all triggered by what was happening in the night sky,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
Not not
Hmm.
so much as to what was happening during the day, but what was happening at night and what you could see at night. And it was those visual cues
Hmm.
that told Hawaiians, oh, now's the time to plant kalo. Now's the time to plant sweet potato. Now's the time to harvest these different foods. Now's the time to fish for these certain types of fish.
Mm-hmm.
Now's the time
Mm-hmm.
to collect certain types of shellfish or the fish that live in the streams,
Yeah,
or the types of medicinal plants in the mountain to keep us all healthy, right? That stuff
absolutely.
happens.
Yeah, yeah. I've there's a part of me that's lived a good chunk of my life in that whole arena, uh, and now I'm back into the world where I don't have that. Uh,
Yeah.
and I can tell you I if I were to kind of think about it and detach myself from a 10,000 foot view looking down, I would say there is a fundamental difference in how people act and how people respond to the world around them when they have that and when they don't have that.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. A quick story. I had some friends. Um, we were working on a project, and they ended up coming to Hawaii as part of this project we were working on. And these guys had never really experienced the night sky
Mm.
in the way that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Where I live, it's dark. There's no street lights. I'm kind of surrounded by the Ko'olau forest on one side, and and then it's quite a ways from Kahului, which is the main town on the island of Maui.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so dark out here that when there's no moon and I walk through my neighborhood, sometimes I can't see the road in front of me. I can see barely, and I get these guys in like beach chairs in my front yard, and I'm like, check this out. And I just kind of lay these chairs back, and they just laying there, staring at the sky. And we start talking about the constellations and the planets and all the rest of the stuff. And I couldn't get these guys to get out of those chairs to go do something else. We
Um,
we sat there for hours, and then one of them came up to me the next day and was like, "That was one of the best nights of my entire life."
yeah,
And all we did was share a couple beers and lay in some beach chairs in front of my house and stare at the stars and the planets. It's amazing.
yeah, wonderful story. I can echo that a few times. I had a few locations where I spent a little bit of time, and I had a lot of people traveling through, and you know, sitting out there on the beach, just watching the Milky Way, watching the evolution of all that stuff. People are just like, wow, I never realized what it looks like. And it's like, yeah, it's pretty incredible, isn't it? And they're like, yeah. And then, and similar to that, people would echo those thoughts. It's like, that I never had an experience like that. I've never seen anything like that. I've never felt anything like that. And it's like, what are we missing? It
A
was
whole,
a whole lot. I agree, brother.
a And then usually experiences like that, the first, half hour, 45 minutes, hour, it's this visual, like, you know, euphoria. You
Hmm.
can't, but then, when you sit there and you look at the sky long enough, it becomes this deeply spiritual thing. And that's what
Absolutely.
people have a hard time, like, really explaining, like what I'm looking at stars. Okay, well, I've looked at stars before, we all have.
Hmm.
But when you get to see like, especially here where I live, like the full glory of of the Milky Way, and as many stars that's visually possible to see with the naked eye,
Hmm.
and the sheer number of them, of numbers of them, are, you're taken aback.
Yeah, no, I mean, from my personal experience, I spent nights out on the ocean, uh, for
Oh yeah,
long-term fishing trips, and I didn't sleep because I
yeah.
would just lay on the deck of the boat and just stare. And it's just like, wow, I've never freaking seen the sky like this. And you just want to soak it all in. And you're right, it does become a very spiritual experience. It becomes, you start to rationalize things. You're like, what are we? What are we doing here? All this stuff out here. Yeah, it's not just twinkles of light anymore. Now you see there's some context to it. There's contours to it. It becomes a visceral experience.
It for sure does. So that's you on that fishing boat, right? So I go outside and I look, and I'm looking for certain things in the sky at certain times of the year, right?
Hmm.
Because I have that connection all the time. Anytime I make it a point every single night at my house, I go outside, I turn the outside lights out. I live in a subdivision where everybody lives on 2 acre parcels, right? So I don't have a lot of neighbors. And so I go outside, I turn out the lights, and usually by 8:30, there's no lights on in my neighborhood. Everybody's either gone to bed or the lights are off.
Mm.
But I go outside and I look and I watch, and I'll be out there usually. Sometimes it drives my wife crazy, but I'll be out there anywhere between like 15 minutes to like 2 hours,
Hmm.
and I'll just sit out there and I'll look. So I have that connection for you on that boat, right? Laying there up all night, man. That's your body, right? That's you, the inner depths of you going, wow, this is a connection that I need to make. And
100%.
so however long it's going to take you to make that connection before your body's like, okay, you can go do other things,
Exactly.
right?
Yep.
That has to be made, and it has to be made with everybody.
Yeah, and
So
it's such a sad travesty that uh, we're among the few.
yeah, we
Yeah.
are. We definitely are. And so it's like, so this brings back to this, our idea about the Hawaii Dark Sky Association,
Mm.
right? And that, that's part of the mission, right? Is everybody should be making that connection. Everybody has a right to see, these celestial bodies at night.
Mhm.
And everybody has, you know you know the right to connect with those. And so, like where you live, the Colorado Dark Sky Association, like people in Colorado, because Colorado is another one of those places, right, where you can, because of your elevation, and you got the plain states on one side of you guys,
Right.
and then you have, then there's the mountains, and then um there's really not a lot until you get like Utah, right?
Right.
And so where you are could be a great, and there are great places to see the sky, but
Oh yeah,
people need to have, it's their right, right?
it
People
is.
should have rights to go out and enjoy the night sky, um, at some level, anyways.
It should almost be a responsibility, man.
That's a better word for sure.
It should almost be. And that's a hard sell, of course, but gosh, from somebody who's done it and talking to somebody who does it all the time, I think you agree. It's one of those things where if you don't understand that connection, you're probably missing something in life.
I can tell you from personal experience, it was probably 12 years ago, 13 years ago, um, when I really started getting out there. So yeah, that's right when my son was starting to take guitar lessons, and I was talking to my friend about stars at Bounty Music. And so I would go outside, and let me tell you, man, I would lay down on these beach chairs that we have. And at first, like when you're staring at the sky, the your brain can't absorb it all. You can't like you can't make sense of it.
Hmm.
So many things were going through my, like, how far is that? What else is out there? What's beyond? Like, you can actually get lost
Yep.
in your thoughts. You can actually get tied up in your thoughts while staring at
It's almost
stars.
it's almost like a psychedelic experience.
It is like a psychedelic
Yeah.
experience. I went through this period where, like, oh man, like I got kind of freaked out,
Yep.
right?
You get that
And
existential dread, even. Yeah.
it's yeah, yeah, right. You're nailing it. I mean, that's exactly what was happening to me. And then it was like going out, and then it became like an addiction, right?
Mm.
And it's
Mm.
something
Hmm.
that is, but it became like an addiction because it was like I felt like it was something I had to get over. Like I had to freaking I needed answers, right?
Right.
And I would go out there and I would just stare and I would stare and I would stare, and and yeah, it changed me.
Yeah.
Like
It
that whole
it changed
changed
me
me
too. Yeah, which is why I would say it's almost a responsibility as a human
for sure.
being. Yeah.
For sure. Like, and so what's cool about Maui is like if you're a tourist here, there's a number of people that have like these big comfy vans with like with like, you know, like Sprinter vans with beverages and like food and all the rest of that stuff. Well, they will pick you up at your hotel and they'll take you to these places, usually like private property, some of the larger ranches and farms here on Maui,
Mhm.
and they'll set it all up so that you can just be out there and just look at the
Mm.
night sky. And you know, and that's what more people should be, especially here. Like you come to Hawaii, take advantage of these things.
Sure.
Like it's cool to go snorkeling, and it's cool to, you want to go whale watching when the whales are here. That's awesome. And then, you know, people want to go, you know, see waterfalls and drive to Hana, you know. But they should really, you know, really take advantage of the fact that you're in one of the best places, if not the best place in the world, to view the sky at night, and you should go out and do it.
Well, you're creating a longing in my heart, brother. You know, you're dredging up some old feelings here.
You know, yeah, for sure. But it's like, but you and I are fortunate, as you said,
Yes,
right? Like
100%.
able to have done this, and like I, you know, and I can picture you like laying on this boat, just like your heart, right, your soul,
You
just
just can't
longing.
stop it. It's
Yeah,
wild. It's a
yeah,
wild experience.
it
Truly
is.
is wild. Yeah.
It is a wild experience where you're longing for it. Like you get a taste of it, and then you long for it, and then it's like, I have to do this until I get to this point where I've reconnected, is what I tell people, right?
Hmm.
It's kind of like you're gonna be in this state, right, of like this is gonna become a necessity until you make that connection, and then now, okay, like I get it, I can go do other things. And our ancestors did that stuff, and we have starved ourselves for a very long time as a society,
Well said.
you know, doing those types of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is important stuff. And if you make it out to Hawaii, bro, we'll go and look at some stars.
Oh, brother. I'm gonna start planning here soon. Let me tell you.
Yeah, get George over here, and we'll. I don't think George is seeing. Well, he's probably seeing more stars than you are, but I mean,
Probably.
he lives near like Honolulu, Waikiki, where it's pretty bright.
Hmm.
But yeah, you know, that's it. So that's that. It's like, you know, for hunting for people, right? Some people are like, oh, you know,
Sure. Yeah.
you gotta provide. You know, it's like this. You know, this thing of like providing food for your family, and people get addicted to that too.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, man. Well, that's beautiful and wonderful. Thank you for actually bringing me back to those moments because, like you said, once you reconnect with those things, they're there. They're a part of you.
Yeah.
And
But
just you talking about it, man, you know, like I'm there. I remember, you know, it's so visceral, and it's so intimate, and it provides such a different experience that, like, you know, those memories when they're drummed up, might as well be sitting on the back of a boat again.
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. But I would say, you know, like they, but you, Ben, are going to, you know, require reconnecting from time to time with that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, brother. I try to get up into the deep mountains and do it, but you know, it's never enough. I'll tell you that it's never enough.
Yeah, it isn't. It isn't. You know, like I said, I'm very fortunate, but I'm, you know, compared to all the rest of the people that live in, you know, like urban areas in America, you know, those people deserve those experiences too. So wherever you live, you know, if you're listening to this podcast, right, get out and see if there's any protections for your night sky. Might be surprised at what you find.
Awesome, brother. I'd like to talk with you more about that sometime. If you know anything in Colorado, because I'd like to attach to that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, well, we're gonna start. You know, we're making a website, and we're getting on. You know, we're starting to develop some social media strategy, but our plan is to provide a place starting here in Hawaii where anywhere in the world you could connect, right? And so we'll have information on what you could do locally. We're going to identify places not just in Hawaii, but eventually around the world, um, you know, that are critical dark sky areas, and hopefully there'll be, you know, interest in some of these communities to preserve those spots, so that everybody, you know, from near and far, wherever those places may be, can come and enjoy those places.
Awesome. Beautiful project, brother. If, I do the technical stuff. I can make websites. I can do all that stuff. So if you need any assistance with that, let me know.
Oh, you better be careful, man.
Nah, trust me. I'm pretty fucking good at what I do.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, it's like we gotta. I just real quick, the guys that I'm doing this with, I'm the guy I'm the vice president. I'm the guy who shows up and goes, okay, so what are we gonna do? And the president, is a friend of mine. That's the guy that works in the music store. It's like, well, we're not gonna accept any money. And I'm like, okay, so that meeting adjourned.
Well,
we just all go home. Because we have to be able to. Well, we have to be able to get some sort of funds so that we can promote ourselves and at least educate people, right? And then they're like, oh yeah. Well, we should definitely do that. Okay, so we're not opposed to taking money, right?
mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually, kind of been my holdup with everything. Like, I wrote the book, but I'm more than willing to give the book free away to anybody who wants it, because it's all about the information in the book. I don't, I'm not trying to make a buck over here.
Right.
So not careful what I ask for. I'm more than willing to help.
Yeah. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. And I may message you about that.
Yeah, hit me. Please do. Yeah, I'm
trying to do.
Probably your guy to help with that. I've been doing that shit for 20 years, and it's old hat to me.
You know what? And this may be something you might enjoy doing.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Well, then, like you could be a part of something like, what we've been talking about is building the model. Right?
Indeed.
Like,
yep.
I don't know anybody else, and we've done a little bit of research, and our idea is novel, and so we could provide a blueprint, right?
100%, man.
Like,
color me in, brother. Whatever you need.
I will.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. I will do that.
All right. In that vein, I think I've been going for at least 2.5 hours here. So, thanks for coming on, brother. Really appreciate it. Always love to talk to you. Really appreciate your insights and your perspective. You always keep it real, man.
I try.
You accomplish. So,
thanks, man. I appreciate you and everything you bring to the couple conversations now that you and I are involved with. It's interesting. You always have a really unique perspective, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, brother. I try too. So we'll do this again soon for sure. Definitely. Let's make a whole thing about the dark skies. Let's just fucking dive into it. Let's do that.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's dive in for sure. Sounds good.
Awesome, brother. Well, I hope you have a wonderful evening. I'm gonna land this plane and sign off. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the live podcast. We'll catch you next time.
Aloha.
Aloha.